Okay, so good afternoon to all. This is Baguio City Public Library hosting the Reading Club Forum, and we are live also from our Facebook page, Baguio City Public Library. So with us, we have a very special guest to discuss regarding topic that is assigned for today. But before we start, may I introduce, of course, our guest speaker, Ma'am Rosella Camte Bani. Tama po ba, ma'am?
Bani,
Okay.
actually.
Bani?
That's actually pronounced Bani.
Bani. Okay. Okay, so si Ma'am Rosella po, of course, she is a graduate of Bachelor of Arts, BCF pa po noon, Baguio Colleges Foundation. Okay, but of course, she was a cum laude. And she also finished her master in cultural anthropology at, in Massachusetts, Brandeis University. Brandeis University. And of course, she is a candidate for PhD, major in History and Cognate in Anthropology in Asian Center in University of the Philippines, Diliman. Of course, with that educational background, she was also an awardee, being an outstanding women leaders of Baguio City for women development and empowerment. She was also a scholar, fellow scholar of the Ford Foundation International Fellowship by Ford Foundation. And of course, with that, I believe that Ma'am has written a lot of papers and presented, yung mga articles po, different topics. But I noticed that talaga naman pong it's on Ibaloy, karamihan po. So, how do we pronounce this? Marcus, Land and Lost in an Ibaloy Community. Okay, so it was presented in the Second International Conference on Cordillera Studies, the Ibaloy Spirituality, which one of the papers that was written, the role of Ibaloy musical instruments in sustaining Ibaloy heritage. It was presented the first regional conference on material culture studies at UP Baguio, challenges and prospects in managing the Ibaloy cultural heritage in Baguio City during the Asia Pacific Sociological Association Conference in Ateneo de Manila University, the unconscious optics of liberation, reimaging the Ibaloys through self-representation in the Chiba Nidwakan exhibition. So this was presented during the Baguio Centennial Conference here at UP Baguio. And of course, on the impact of land dispossession, hindi po disposition na dispossession. Tama po, ma'am?
Yes.
On the Ibaloy culture, the Luwakan case during the Baguio Land Conference. Okay, so it also in the UP Baguio. Of course, some of the articles were also published, such as Rituals of Passage in Ibaloy, Death Rituals and Practices, can be found at the Cordillera Review Journal of Philippine Culture and Society. Also, the Ibaloy Death Rituals in Igorota Magazine. Ibaloy Day, the longing for the community of Ibaloys in the Baguio Chronicle. Ibaloy beliefs and values in healing and death practices in Shiva, a reader on Ibaloy history and culture. I guess we have this at sa local history section po namin. And preserving the Ibaloy culture through schools of living traditions at Baguio Midland Courier. And of course, the Mangbonong, an integral member of the Igorot community at Inglayan. Saan po yung Inglayan, mga ito?
Predecessor of the Igorota Magazine.
Okay, so siguro hindi ko pa, kasi nasa high school pa lang yata. Okay. Aside from that, she is also a volunteer, no? And these are some of the activities that she is into. She is a coordinator of the School of Living Tradition on Ibaloy Performing Arts, so until now. And she is the founder and president of Shiva Di Duakan Incorporated. This is a center for Ibaloy heritage and Luacan history up to the present. She is also a community facilitator and curator. And of course, she is also a co-founder of the Igorota Foundation Incorporated. So ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you our guest speaker for this afternoon, Ma'am Rosella Bani Campe.
Thank you, Ma'am Esther. I didn't expect you to read all of the ones. So, would you like to choose the first questions first, or?
Mag-present na lang po kayo.
Okay, all right. So, I was invited here to share with you the cultural heritage, cultural mapping project of the city of Baguio. Cultural mapping, just to have a baseline definition, according to the book of Cook and Taylor, cultural mapping is an approach that is used to identify, record, and use cultural resources and activities for building communities, where communities will map what is important to them. So, cultural mapping is basically a research and documentation activity as the first stage of coming up with a database of the cultural heritage resources in a locality, and from which the known existing cultural resources can now become a reference for the city or of the locality to plan on how these cultural resources and cultural activities can be restored, can be conserved, can be sustained for the benefit not only of the present generation but also of the next generation. So cultural mapping is a very important step in the heritage conservation framework. It starts by knowing what is existing in the locality. What are the existing cultural resources and heritage resources that are found within the locality? So that's the first step. First, we need to know what exists before we go to the second stage, which is being able to appreciate what these are. You can never appreciate what you don't know. So it is first important for us to know what are available in the locality before we can be proud of what we have. So very key to have cultural appreciation is knowing first what these cultural properties are within the locality. And when by appreciating these cultural resources, after knowing them, the next stage would be developing the valuing. We would be able to value these resources, meaning there is an effort to sustain this, to protect this, and conserve what are existing. So those are the activities that you could do. And by valuing this, and by sustaining the research, the heritage resources in the community, then people will be able to benefit from these resources. So it is a cycle, and by benefiting from these resources, there is a need to know more about these cultural properties. So it starts from the start of the circle, which is trying to know more about what else are there, and then getting to appreciate what these are, getting to value them before you could be able to benefit from these resources. So the cultural mapping project follows that cycle of heritage conservation. That's actually by Hurley's heritage conservation framework. The cultural mapping project follows that cycle, which starts with documenting, researching and documenting the existing cultural heritage properties, and then developing appreciation by involving the communities in the process of cultural mapping, by actually asking what does the community consider as significant for them. So cultural mapping is a participative process. It is not done by one office or by one person or by the government alone, but it is a participative process that involves both the people on the ground, or the informants, we refer to as informants, or the culture bearers and the users of the culture have to be involved in the cultural mapping process, because key or underlying the cultural mapping process is that identifying what the people consider as significant for them to be part of their cultural heritage. So we get this input from the people in coming up with a list of the cultural heritage properties within a locality. So it's important that it has to be done together with the community. This involves the cultural mapping process. This involves capacitating the community to do the mapping themselves, so that on their own they can also prepare a map of what existing resources they have. Then after that, at the end of a cultural mapping activity, after the recording, after the documentation, there is usually one part there which is a workshop on utilization, cultural utilization, meaning having had a listing of cultural resources, the mappers, including the people involved in the mapping, such as the informants, such as the mappers, such as the culture bearers, will come together in a workshop to identify ways on how they could use their existing resources, that's the product of the cultural mapping, how to use it for several purposes. So for example, in terms of economic development, in terms of education, in terms of even spirituality. So for example, for economic activities, because cultural mapping involves several domains of culture. It involves 5 domains, like the intangible cultural heritage. So intangible cultural heritage, let me just give you examples. It covers, the intangible cultural heritage covers the domain of performing arts. So the indigenous dances are part that are included in the mapping. And in the past, the city already had its first cultural mapping phase 1 project. So I will get my examples from that experience because I was part of that. We had the first one that started in December last year and it ended in March. So performing arts, these are one of the things under intangible cultural heritage that are being mapped. So it involves our indigenous dances. So the Tayaw, for example, the indigenous dance of the Ibaloys had been included in the mapping. Intangible cultural heritage also includes oral traditions and expressions. Oral traditions and expressions, which includes folk tales, which includes legends that are found within the area. It also includes works by authors from the locality that can be used, that incorporate cultural elements from the area. So for me, I did a cultural mapping of the the short story of Sinay Hamada. Sinay Hamada is a very good, he's a very multi-awarded story writer, short story writer. In the early part of the 20th century, he wrote a lot of short stories. In fact, you have a book here, a compilation of his short stories. You have a book here on his stories. So one of the stories he wrote there, I did a mapping, and then I highlighted what are the key important cultural elements that are found in his stories, that are valuable, that are significant, that can be used and that can be utilized later on by the educational sector. So other intangible cultural heritage, ICH related domains include knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe. So ito ang ganda nito. For example, like me, I did a mapping of how do people interpret the moon. So it's part of the cultural mapping of the first book. Like for example, I'm an Ibaloy, and I'm sure it's also shared by the other ethno-linguistic groups here in the Cordillera. There are meanings of the moon shapes that are important for agriculture, right? That was in the past, of course, but now probably seldom use it anymore. But you know, these are the wisdom and the ideas and the products of our ancestors in the past, based probably from their observation of the universe when there was not much television or electronic, or that would explain why. But since it's a cultural heritage, these are considered valuable, and it had worked for them in the past. So the challenge for us is how do we use this knowledge now? But even before that knowledge will disappear, it's important to document and to write and to make that knowledge available for anybody who would like to know about these things. So that's one example of knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe. Also, there's another one also, and I would like to mention it because it's timely. It's the last week of October, and November is about to come. There is this bird. It's called the killing bird. The killing bird. We did not map the bird itself, but it's the significance of the presence of the killing bird when it arrives here in our place. So for farmers at the time, the presence or absence of the killing bird is important because it guides their decision making on when to plant, what to plant, and where to plant. So it had helped them before, and we find it very, very important that people now would realize that in the past, our ancestors have been relying on this nature, the birds, and their contribution to the survival of the people in the past. Another related domain of intangible cultural heritage are traditional craftsmanship. So this includes the weaving. We mapped the weaving here in the city, the existing weaving. Skills that are found here in the city. So we have the backstrap weaving as well as the loom weaving. Under intangible cultural heritage, it also includes social practices, rituals, and festive events. So I am an Ibaloy. So in Luacan, I'm from Luacan, and Luacan is known as an Ibaloy community. The Ibaloys, by the way, are the indigenous peoples here in the city. So we have a history longer than the government of the Philippines, being the indigenous people here in the city. And even if it's now 2022, we're still practicing some of our rituals here in the city. In fact, there's one that's scheduled in November 3 and 4. You might want, I'll ask the host if you're interested. You might want, if you're curious and know what it is, then I can ask them to invite you. Anyway, so we still have a lot of indigenous rituals here in Baguio City, particularly among the Ibaloys, and particularly in Luacan, where I come from, and parts of Camp 7 and parts of Bakakang, and of course Happy Hollow still perform indigenous rituals. So we map a lot of these rituals here in Luacan. So we have rituals to remember our dead, of course, which is very interesting because it's something that other ethno-linguistic groups also observe, like in Ifugao. My husband is half Ifugao, and they have this practice also of cleaning the bones of the dead, for example. So we have that equivalent in Luacan, and we still do it until now. So these rituals, when we map these rituals, we map the beliefs surrounding this practice, and we map its significance, and we map we include who are the informants. So that's the process. Those are the specific steps of doing the mapping itself. So I was saying that these are the things that we map when we do cultural mapping. But that's only one domain that I mentioned, the intangible cultural heritage. The other domains include built heritage or tangible cultural heritage. The built heritage refers to the structures that are significant to the community. So in Baguio City, the built heritage that we are proud of here are the colonial inspired structures, because we know that in Baguio City, right after the Spaniards, the Americans were the administrators here in the Philippines, and they made Baguio City as the summer capital of the Philippines. So in order to provide for the services and for the facilities for the summer capital, and in order to meet the first objective of choosing Baguio, which is to become the convalescent place for the sick Westerners, they had to build hospitals. That's why BGH is a cultural heritage, the structure, the old BGH cultural heritage structure. There were a lot of built heritage structures that were mapped here. We didn't go to Janhay because we didn't start yet in Janhay. But we have Mansion House, for example. We have teachers camp. The teachers camp was set up 1905, and we have several structures there that are colonial. The green painting and the green roof and the white painting, the wooden. And you're familiar, if you go to a teachers camp, you're familiar. You would know. So teachers camp was mapped, and the buildings and structures that have were considered significant. So we have intangible cultural heritage. We have tangible cultural heritage, which includes built heritage. We also have sites. Sites, by the way, teachers camp falls under site because it involves more than one building. Maluwang siya, it's wide. So for example, I mapped Gisad Valley as a site. So what's the significance of Gisad Valley? So others of us, we also map Court of Appeals compound as a site, aside from mapping the buildings themselves. Because if you notice the buildings at Court of Appeals, those are the colonial-inspired buildings. So we have not yet mapped Supreme Court compound, but Burnham as a site was also mapped. And there are particular structures here that were also mapped, like particular structures or sites like Melvin Jones grandstand is one mapping. So what other domains do we map? We also map under tangible cultural heritage our material culture. Material culture. So for example, what do the communities consider as important material culture here? So for example, part of my mapping of the rituals includes mapping of significant materials that are also used during the ritual. So for example, no, they didn't say that long. Actually, it's the process. It's the process of preparing those material culture that was mapped, because the materials to be mapped should be at least 50 years old, or the structures to be mapped should be at least 50 years old. But not all materials and structures that are more than 50 years old will be mapped, because it depends on what the people consider as significant. Yeah, that's the important denominator or determinant of what cultural heritage shall be mapped, and that is it should be significant in what way. It should be significant historically, meaning it will tell you about the history of the place. So for example, somebody keeping perhaps a memento that was given by the early administrators, the American administrators, and you've kept that until now, and by looking at it, it will tell you about the history of the American administration here in the city of Baguio at one time. Then if you are willing to include that in the mapping, then we can include it in our cultural mapping. So there are a lot of materials that can be mapped actually, not only material, but so if you notice, these are material and these are material which is tangible and intangible. So it covers beliefs, practices, ways of cooking, in dance, performances. It also includes flora and fauna. So so for example, how do we choose what flora and fauna do we map that will be significant in the city of Baguio? So we ask ourselves, if you mention Baguio City, what are the plants and animals that you identify with Baguio City? Sunflower, yes.
Everlasting.
The everlasting, yes. I did a mapping of everlasting. We were glad because we had to take an actual photo of the everlasting, and then we found it at the Court of Appeals compound. They planted, and it was in full bloom at the time that we were doing the mapping. So we were able to get a good photo, because part of the mapping is that you have to get a photo of the plant for plants. So you have to take it from the top view until the roots, and so those are. So in our cultural mapping team, there's a group of several expertise among us. There are biologists, there are architects, there are anthropologists, there are historians, engineers. So it's a combination of a lot of skills, social scientists, in order to be able to really present the heritage resource according to the format and according to the requirements of National Commission for Culture and the Arts, because this project is done in partnership with the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, NCCA. So, before I go to that, I will finish first what are the things that I mapped. I'll make sure that I have discussed all the domains. So, the intangible cultural heritage, the built heritage, the tangible the tangible cultural heritage, which are the buildings and structures, material culture. It also includes flora and fauna. So, like for example, the plants that are associated or that distinguish the city, the flora, fauna, animals. We did a mapping of the cow because historically, yes, the cow and the horses. The horses are associated with the city of Baguio. That's why you have. Right Park, where they have horseback riding, because the city, it talks about the history of the city. The city, before it became a city, was an Ibaloy community where the Ibaloys, have lots of animals that are, here. This site actually where we are used to be the ranch, or where the animals of Carino used to roam. That's why you have a statue of the Carabao. Yeah, I did a mapping of that statue. Statue is included in the tangible heritage. If you see Abanao, you have the statue of the drinking horse and the old lamppost. So when I did the mapping of the statue of the drinking horses, I have to relate it with the history of the place, which is that area used to be where the Cariños would call their horses to have their salt. Cows like salt, and so that's the area where they used to give salt for the cows. So cows, as a important fauna here in Baguio City, was included in the map. And you would be surprised because it includes a carabao also. So somewhere in the city there's a carabao. So that's something that we, I hope children will be very exciting to know about. We also mapped the dog, or taking care of the dog, or but unfortunately, unfortunately, it's a practice of. It's part of the ritual. The butchering of the dog is also included in the map. As part of the map, because that's part of the old practice here, as part of a ritual. And it's not in violation of the animal rights because there's a provision in the act, right? That if it's used for ritual purposes, then the butchering of dog is allowed. So it's included in the map. So you would see that it really speaks of the heritage and it speaks of the history of the place, the beginning of Baguio, and the butchering of the dog, for example, is there's a ritual for Ibaloys, but also among the Kankanais, there is a ritual for the Kankanais where they butcher the dog. Like for example, Daos. Yeah, so we have not yet mapped the Daos, but later when we resume our cultural mapping, we will include Daos to be mapped. Yeah. Daos is a practice of the Kankanai where after a tragedy, they need to have some cleansing activity after that tragedy, and usually the offering is a dog. So it's part of a ritual. So it's not something you do. So in terms of significance, that is the significance. If you map that, would be the significance in terms of spirituality, and it's, for me, when I'm mapping a ritual, it's mostly the significance in terms of social cohesion, of bringing community and family members together when you do ritual, because a ritual is never done by the host themselves, by a single family. It's usually in collaboration or in participation with members of several families in the communities, because it's not a joke to undertake a ritual. You need a lot of help, volunteer help to get the wood, to prepare, to do the cooking, to do the serving, to do the washing, and all sort of thing. So, talking about cultural mapping, these are the things, for me personally, it's because of the values that are embedded in the heritage and in the practices. The values that build communities, the values that people use to help one another, to come together, and there was a question a while ago about what's the relevance of cultural mapping to the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, and one of the Sustainable Development Goals that's resilient cities. To be resilient means having a support system during disasters to aid you in times of need, and this helping of one another are embedded within the culture and are being sustained by certain practices. And therefore, in times of tragedy or in times of disasters, you can depend on your neighbor and the community, since you have already nurtured, you have sustained that value of coming together in times of need of a member in the community. So for me, underlying this cultural mapping effort that we are doing goes beyond the immediate purpose of coming up with a list of existing cultural heritage resources, because it's in the utilization where it is most important. That's the last part of the cultural mapping, of coming together and deciding how to sustain and how to maintain these cultural heritage resources for the benefit of the community, not only of the present, but of the future generation. I think I will stop there. If you have any questions, if I made is that comprehensive enough about what's cultural mapping, what's the objective, and how did we do cultural mapping here in the city? So we started the cultural mapping here in the city. Another reason also of why the city sponsored the cultural mapping project is because it's a mandate. It's provided by law that all LGUs should conduct a cultural mapping project as a prerequisite in coming up with a PRICA. It's called the Philippine Registry of Cultural Resources. Philippine Registry of Cultural Resources. Okay. It's provided by the Heritage Law of the Philippines of 2009. Heritage Law is Republic Act 10066, okay, which is supported by DILG Memorandum 2017-53, whereby in order for a locality to receive a seal of good local governance, it should be able to have at least two of these things. Number one, presence of a council for the promotion of culture and the arts. Number two, budget appropriated for the conservation and preservation of cultural property. And number three is the availability of cultural property and inventory in the locality. So, since it's coming from the Department of Interior and Local Government, it covers all local government units, and it mandates all local government units to comply with this memorandum. So the result of our cultural mapping project will become the basis of the inventory of the city's cultural heritage properties that are submitted to the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. NCCA is the repository of this listing of cultural properties, and they make they just released actually a listing of all compliant LGUs, meaning all the local government units that have complied with this memorandum to submit a listing. So before, and it's a requirement of NCCA that that listing should be done in accordance with the process of NCCA. That's why we partnered with NCCA, so that we are doing it in accordance to their format. On the basis of that, in support of the DILG memorandum, there's also a joint memorandum circular of 2018, which aims to enjoin all local government units to establish and maintain a local inventory of cultural property. So the word here is maintain. So cultural mapping is not a one-shot deal, it's not a one-thing deal, but it's actually ongoing thing in the city. Why ongoing? Because it cannot be done in 1 year. You know, there's so much to be mapped that you cannot map everything in 5 months or in probably 1 year. When we started in December last year, we have an initial list of 600 of potential cultural heritage properties for mapping. We pared it down to 400, but we were only able to accomplish at the end of the 5-month mapping less than 250 cultural heritage properties. So this inventory of cultural property should be an ongoing thing. So the plan of the city is that hopefully it becomes integrated as among the job descriptions of the regular staff members of the city. I don't know if it's going to be here in the library. Yeah, because we had our during our first involvement in cultural mapping, we had our base here in the library. Because of the availability of the resources, the reference materials. For our secondary resources, our primary resources were on field. We went for actual interviews on field. So we left, we did not stay here all the time. We went on field to interview the informant and culture bearers. But we also needed some secondary resources, so like books, and we're glad we're here because so far our library has this collection of local history materials. So our references here have been very, very helpful in coming up with our cultural mapping. Yes. What are other mandates? The mandates, the City Council came up also with a City Council resolution in 2020. Year 2020. It's called the Baguio City Cultural Heritage Conservation Committee. And the resolution states that the committee shall conduct cultural heritage mapping of Baguio heritage and conduct other related activities in line with the cultural heritage preservation, protection, and strengthening program of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts for the city of Baguio. So this resolution was introduced by the group of Councilor Cosalan, Councilor Ali Aladio, and the Vice Mayor, our Vice Mayor Uloan. Okay, and on the basis of these resolutions, the City Mayor issued an executive order actually to finally create the team for cultural mapping and which was the basis now for the city to come up with the necessary budgetary supplement for the conduct of the cultural mapping. So this cultural mapping is actually to comply with national and local mandates. Yeah. So I can entertain some questions if you have any questions.
Okay, so you have questions?
When can available for the result of the textbooks? Series 1, 2, 3, 4. The book
Yeah.
1.
Yeah, there are 4 volumes. There are 4 books that we were able to launch last September 1. That's 4 volumes, which means because we're talking of less than 250 heritage resources, and on an average, one cultural map has 16 pages. So talagang it's really thick. So and that's why it's expensive to to print the hard copy. But I was told that it's the e-copy shall be made available. I'm sure the library will become one of the recipients. They have printed they have printed a limited copy because the material was really, really very beautiful because it's full color, it's glossy, and it's hardbound. That's why it's expensive. But it will be made available electronically to the public. We just have to wait for a little while for some editing to really make it look professional, more professional. Yeah, there are some editings actually that have to be made sure that have to be done. Not much on the content, but more on the bibliographical references that needed to be checked. Otherwise, it will be available, I think, by December, electronically.
Oh, wow. Kasi nagsasound. Nag-trend kasi yung mic. Okay, so, questions?
Anyone?
Ma'am, there was a question in the previous forum that we have, and I guess the cultural mapping was touched also because we are also aware of what's going on, and the question was it validated? Those informations that were gathered by the cultural mappers, was it validated? So that was the question, and I cannot answer that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, all right. I can give you the answer to that. We were really actually very conscious of that the output of the cultural mapping project has the approval of the community. And yes, we had a validation workshop which was participated by selected members of the community. These are culture bearers, key informants were invited. We had it in June in the presence of National Commission for Culture and the Arts. And actually, aside from the community validation, we also had external validators. These are professionals who know a lot about the subject matter, scientists who went through all the output to ensure that in terms of content and in terms of format, they comply with the standards of with the standards necessary to validate the materials. But aside from that, we also had we had it here at the city center. Another special validation activity that we did was in Happy Hallow, because Happy Hallow, as we know, is a ancestral domain community. So even before we started collecting data from Happy Hallow, we had to undergo a process of consultation with the people in order to get their free, prior, and informed consent. So we are very conscious about getting the prior approval of the community before we collected the data. And after we collected the data, we presented the output to them and inquired again from them in a plenary in the presence of the community in Happy Hollow. We did that again. We again consulted them and get their agreement and approval if the things that we mapped will they consider it as their cultural heritage. So we underwent that process. So I hope I answered that
At
question.
least, yes.
Yes,
It was
yes.
answered kasi I cannot answer the question.
Yes, it was validated. And some of us mappers were practitioners ourselves, also. So that adds to the information that we included in the maps. Meaning we can be our primary informants ourselves.
Yeah. Okay. So, more questions?
The primary resource, meaning is the field line, the researchers, they collecting the many data and documentation, right?
The
Primary source,
primary source,
Yes.
the primary source are the key informants in the community,
yes.
the culture bearers, who have the first-hand information about a certain practice, about the heritage.
Yes, team will be the collecting all the resources, is it?
Yeah,
From the community?
the city hired cultural mappers who were first trained. They were trained to do cultural mapping, and then we contacted key informants in the community, the primary informants, and then we arranged a date to interview them. So that's what we did, and then afterwards we drafted the map based on using the form prescribed by the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. And if there are information that needs to be validated, even before that formal validation, some of us return back to the informants. If we are not sure of some data, we need to do a second interview. Then that's what we did. So it was a work in partnership with the informants actually to come up with an output for a cultural map. Did I answer your question?
Yes, and the actually meaning of the during before the go to field will be the primary the research in the library.
Yeah, of
And
course.
then after that, and then the team will be the visiting the field location, and then will be the many also the collecting the resources from the direct, for example, oral interview and typewrite. This is all the primary resource. Where collected, how can will be the access?
Access.
Yeah, collection, yes. Collection of the primary source from the community.
Access.
What practices?
Yeah, the information that we gathered from the community, we encoded it, we inputted it, integrated it. We used the form. So we have a form which is a product of the mapping. And yeah, you're right also that some of us did it like that. To first read about that cultural heritage. So for example, I did a cultural heritage mapping of indigenous games. For us, we know the sipking or the hopscotch. Hopscotch. So before I went to look for an informant, I first read it's good you have a book here about indigenous games.
Yes.
So it helped me as a mapper to interview. And later on, I cited that reference also that I read here. So all of those information from the secondary source and from the key informants were all put together into a formatted question and answer, which now we consider as the map of that heritage. So the important parts of the map are, of course, the name of the element, the name of that heritage resource, the background information about that heritage. As much as possible, we get a photograph of the. So I have to take a picture of that girl playing the sipking, and then geographical location. Where did I gather? Where did I take that? Or where did I collect the data? Yeah, and so that we know which part of the city is it being still practiced. And then related domains, and then the description of that cultural heritage. So if it's an indigenous game, it's the process and it's the step. So starting from throwing the stone and then making the first step and then returning, you have to detail the process. So the challenge was, by reading it, people can play the game if they have not yet played before from reading your maps. So it is that detailed. So it's a very, very rich resource. Even in the rituals that I made, you can perform that ritual. You only need a priestess to perform it with you, but you can do it as a host. So all this information and other information that we depends on the domain, but most of the time we included stories or narratives associated with the element. So for example, in the hopscotch indigenous game, the sipking, what are related stories about that? So we would say that most of us children here in the city, when there was not yet no computer, no electronic gadgets that take most of our time, we spend our time with other children, and we are there in the middle of the street or in the backyard playing. It has been part of our growing up years here in the city. So those are examples of related stories. So we also capture those information that will help in justifying the significance of that certain element, heritage. And then the most important part is the significance. What are the historical significance of that heritage? What is the aesthetic significance? So this is very important in terms of built heritage, like what is the aesthetics of those colonial houses that we have. The scientific significance, so this is very important, especially, but if you can come up with scientific, all of this significance in every domain, that's very challenging, that's very, very important. What's the scientific significance? What's the socio-economic significance? The political significance, the spiritual significance, and all of these are explained. And then we make an assessment of the heritage. We assess in terms of what's the condition or status of the practice. Is it disappearing, or in terms of flora and fauna, we refer to websites that have already made an assessment of this flora and fauna, whether it is endangered or whether it is extinct or whether it's critical or not. So we use also already established references in order to describe the status of the heritage. So, like for example, the sipking, we would say what is the status of the sipking practice? There's not much. Siguro, I was lucky to see those children playing the sipking, but in how many barangays in Baguio City do we still see children playing the sipking? Not only in Luacan, where I collected the information. And one of the significance that I placed there is the cultural, the significance of young people coming together and playing with one another. Not unlike now where you just have your gadget and sit by yourself and not communicating and not socializing with other children. Another is the scientific. It's the exercise that they get from the skipping and hopping and running and all those things. So those are the things that we include in the significance. So the mappers are really challenged to bring out all of this during their data collection. So we describe the status in terms of conservation. And we identify the constraints, the threats, the issues, and the challenges to the heritage. And then we describe existing measures and safeguarding measures being taken here in the city. So if there are, how are they being transmitted? Are they being transmitted through formal education, through non-formal education? Are they being identified, documented in research? Are they being preserved and protected? Are they being promoted or enhanced? Are they being revitalized? So we check the particular conservation status of that particular heritage. So that during the utilization workshop, this will become the basis for coming up with policies in response to the status or condition of the heritage that was mapped. So for example, if it's critical and therefore the city should come up, actually this will feed into the planning of the city also. It's not because it's a mandate that they will do it, but actually the benefit is that it's going to enter into the planning of the city, and for the city council to come up with the necessary legislation for the protection and conservation of these heritage resources. You mentioned about we were talking about the city as a creative city earlier today. Actually, the job of the creative city will be easier because of these cultural maps. They already know what are existing in the locality in terms of indigenous skills, that they can tap for enterprise, for art, and for education. If they know that it's important in terms of values formation, then they can use it as an example in their curriculum development for localization or indigenization. So if you realize the value of the benefit of this cultural map is really immeasurable. You cannot measure how much you can really do based on this cultural map. All right. So those are the parts of the map. So all those information we put here in this format. Did I answer your question?
Continue question. How to plan to implement it or integrate with the higher education and then the level of the education to
Yes.
mapping bring to their field of the teaching.
Yes. The what we have not yet done in the first phase of cultural mapping on the 5 months that ended in March, there is still one activity that we haven't done yet. It's the utilization workshop. I think they're going to be scheduled it this December. But definitely, the DepEd had been invited during the validation workshop, and they're aware of this project. And I think most of them will be the ones who will be receiving copies of the map, the cultural mapping output. Most of the schools will be getting copies of the book. And from there, as I mentioned a while ago, it's important that we know first that it exists. So now that DepEd would know that it exists, then the next part will be, the ball is on their hand now, and how to tap the information that are found in the book in their curriculum development. So it is an ongoing thing in collaboration with a lot of sectors for the full utilization of the map. But at least the first step had been accomplished, and that is we have collected this information which we may not know exists. But now we know that they exist, and now the next challenge for DepEd, for example, is now how to utilize this information that I found here. One example that they can do because I'm from Luacan, and I had there was a principal in our high school there that partnered with Shivani Luacan, and then I volunteered to help in their localization and then indigenization of their lesson plans. What I did was I arranged a walk in the community with them. So I showed them. We had 2 hours after the class in the afternoon. We had a walk in our community, which was included in the map also. It's because Luacan has the airport. The only airport in the city is found in Luacan. There's a sculpture in relief in the terminal of Luacan Airport. We mapped. Incidentally, that relief, that sculpture, was done by one of the personalities that we mapped also. By the way, included in the mapping are personalities and organizations. So one of the personalities that was mapped was Astudillo, and he made that. That was around the 1970s. And then I showed the teachers that that sculpture depicts the cultural heritage of the Cordillera. One side depicts the Ibaloy practices, and the other side depicts the other ethno-linguistic groups in the provinces in the city. So the teachers should know that if they're talking about lessons on community and about kamayanan and culture, it doesn't have to be always within the confines of the classroom, because actually there is an available resource just a few meters from the school that they can visit to pinpoint and make the lesson interesting for the children. And that is the presence of that sculpture that was done by one of the artists that we mapped, because it's very good. We also did that there's a sculpture near Burnham Park. It's a relief sculpture. There's this near the biking lane, near the lake. Did you notice that in the corner there is a bus relief? Yes, there's a bus relief. The maker of that is the same as the one who made that sculpture in Luacan. Sculpture in relief or bas relief. So the next challenge is really the schools now on how to utilize the existing resources that are found in the map. And I'm sure the teachers are very good at coming up with the lesson plans so that they can use that information, to make the lessons near the students and where the students can relate, so that they can learn the lesson faster. And it's even better if they're aware of the rituals that are going on in the community, so that if they're allowed, they can, the students can have a first-hand experience of undergoing an indigenous ritual, so they can appreciate the value of that ritual. So it's really rich, and it's really challenging, and it's exciting, and it will make learning better, I think, for students, so that they will not just rely on, but they should be, go out in the community where the resources can be found. That is, if the teachers know what are existing in the community. So I hope, but we're not yet done with Luacan. I'm sure there's still a lot of resources that can be found there. But in the less than 50 maps that I prepared, most of it were found in Luacan. So maswerte ang Luacan school if they know how to use the maps. So that's I think the dynamics that I foresee happening. That we have produced the map and it's made available, and it's now high time for the different sectors to utilize it. But siguro during that workshop, it will be more formalized on how that can be able to use it.
when will you plan to launching the website to
Yeah.
put in the go to international
Yeah,
mapping everyone
that's
can.
exciting. That's as the City Planning and Development Office. It's headed by architect Donna Riviera Tapangen. She's our City Planning and Development Office. It is under her actually that the mapping project had been facilitated under the City Mayor's office. And she has the heart for this also. Being an architect herself, she's very much aware of the significance of cultural heritage as a basis for planning. Yeah, and she often mentions that culture is the soul of the community.
Okay, city planning office. One of the plan is making the Baguio twin digital city project. Integrate the one layer of the one is cultural mapping. Independently, also build the website, cultural mapping website only independently or separately.
I cannot answer that. I cannot answer that yet. Probably after the utilization workshop, they have the plans probably be more firmed up. How to disseminate the information of the cultural mapping output. So I'm not yet sure how we're going to do it. But it would be nice to have a separate website or probably a separate domain in the website for cultural mapping, and then you can just click it and everything else will appear. But yes.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I am a student from BSU po, BSU SLS. Then I'm grade 12, and what I noticed that we had a subject called UCSP, Understanding Culture, Society, and Politics. Then when I came here, I realized, isn't this an opportunity? Because right now we were having class, and then I felt like it seemed lacking. And I was looking at my classmates. It seemed like their own culture, they're learning their own culture, which they do not know about their culture, but they're learning it, but it feels like it's not entering their head. It's like it's going out of the other ear. Because it's just lectures, modules, lectures, modules, lectures, modules. So and right now for the kids, they're too integrated with their gadgets, phone, they can just read like that. But the problem here is the difference of actually doing it and going to a site which can engrave in their head is different. Because I can read 10 ebooks a lot of times about my culture, but after about 1 week, I would forget about it. Compared to, for example, I was recently accredited as a community tour guide by DOT, and if I had that experience where I'm touring someone and talking about our culture, that will stay in my head because I will keep doing it, and it's the experience of actually trying it, and then teaching about it. It's like, if you want to learn something, you have to do it, and you learn while teaching it to another person. That's what I experienced during my tour guiding and when I was teaching people about some parts. And then when I came here, then I remembered about the cultural mapping because my dad, Clint Tynan, talked to me about it, and I was like, wait, isn't it better if maybe, because in our school, it feels so lacking, really. The lacking of activities is so lacking that we haven't had a school trip since grade 7. And it was just a science fair. It was just a 2-hour science fair just over there at St. James, and then after that, it's just none. Then here came the opportunity about culture mapping. Is it possible for your team or the culture mapping itself to team up with the school to like maybe create an event where they could tour around a few of the significant culture and mapping heritage sites, or invite someone from your team of mappers to come and have a seminar at our school? Because I think kids right now, even though they're given an opportunity to learn, they won't take it unless it's at school and unless it's mandatory.
Yes.
Then giving them the excitement to actually try it, that's when you get their interest. Especially this age, this my generation. If it's just talking, they'll just find some way to hide their phone doing this. I know because I've done that before.
Yeah.
But what I've because there was various workshops that I went to, and then the difference of just lecture and actually giving you the chance to do it, it's a lot different. So is there a chance po that I like a partnership or just a slight seminar po? Give them judgments to learn.
Yeah, it would be nice. Yeah, I understand what you mean. I also, it was mentioned earlier, I also headed the Shiva Nidwakan Center for Ibalu Heritage and Wakan History, where I work with young people under the School of Living Tradition. What I did with them was I brought them to the School of Living Tradition is the utilization of the cultural masters to teach the young people about their culture. So there's a distinct basket that we use during the rituals, and I brought the students to the cultural master to do a workshop. So it's a hands-on. We have an old informant, the cultural master, demonstrating, and they themselves are following. So it's on field. It's not in the school. So it's possible. I think it's possible that to do that. But if you want it to be formally done, I think and if you want us to be involved in this, I think you can direct the letter to City Planning Development Office, or it's something that your school could probably perhaps do in partnership with the school, with the City Planning Development Office. But I understand what you meant, that it's learning by doing, and really, and I mentioned earlier that the need to develop the appreciation and valuing of these practices, so that even if it will take a lot of time, you'll not forget it because you know the value. You know that you'll benefit from it. So I think that's the challenge of the teaching of this heritage, or it's not just on the level of knowing that it exists, but hopefully the method in such a way so that they will be able to generate the appreciation that we said we want them to have, because as you mentioned, sometimes it just enters in one ear and goes out.
Yes.
So that's a good point that you raised, that the methodology of teaching about these things, so that it will really develop the appreciation that we hope would be generated from learning these heritage properties. And it's possible. I'm also a member of Unjuni Ibadoy. Unjuni Ibadoy. In 2014, I helped them come up with a Ibaloy festival, and one of the workshops there is teaching the young people, and then coming up with the crafts. It was crafts, learning about the language. So it's a hands-on thing, and I hope it's a challenge for DepEd to come up with lessons that are hands-on, more field work, more experiential.
When we were going to schools, yung mga elementary schools, during the pre-pandemic, I noticed one sa fourth elementary.
Fort Del Pilar?
Yes, sa PNA. I'm not sure, pero I saw parang they made a structure wherein School of Living Tradition, iPad, para sa kanilang iPad. So I guess not all schools kasi have that. But then, I believe na meron silang subject, di ba ma'am? iPad. IP education.
Yeah.
They have. Meron talaga sa elementary na. So, it's starting from the elementary. They are already aware of that. Kaya lang yung sabi nga ni ating isang kasamahan dito na it should be yung talagang they will try and they will see kung paano, so that combination. But then I appreciate yung elementary schools to come up with that. Hindi lang kasi namin napasok yun, kaya lang I believe that there are materials there to show yung mga bata kung ano yung mga let's say yung mga ginagamit before na mga materials. So parang sort of museum,
Yeah, pwede,
a mini
pwede.
museum doon sa kanilang to show yung mga let's say, kagamitan, no?
Material
Kasi school,
culture.
oo, material culture. Yun ang ano. So, I'm not sure kung dito sa fourth elementary school, kung nakita yon, but I remember nakita ko yun.
Yeah,
Sa ibang
those are good
schools-
initiatives.
Yeah.
In Happy
Sa ibang
Hollow,
schools
they
wala.
came up with the high school there. It's coming up with a museum for their school. But I also, in the absence of a museum, also I also am believer of the community museum, which means educating about culture of heritage in situ, meaning where they are. Because some materials you cannot bring it in a museum, but they are embedded in the community. So that's my dream for Luacan, for example. But I did it initially with the teachers. So aside from the one that we saw in the airport, yung sculpture in relief, I brought them to my house where we have the bangkilay. Bangkilay is an indigenous table-like, we call it altar, used in rituals to really show to them what this material is. So pwedeng yun in situ, meaning that's why it's important to have cultural mapping so that you can identify what are the existing cultural resources in your own community, and so that's where the teachers and students can go and see where these are, because not all of them can be brought in a museum or in a room, but they are found in the community itself. So maganda yun. It's really a good challenge. So it starts with mapping what are the existing cultural resources in the community. Yeah.
Going back to cultural mapping, is it possible to just refer to the secondary resources?
Mahirap po. Kasi you need to have, ito nga sinabi ko, you need to have additional background stories, the history, you need to have an informant who can tell you about their experience about the heritage resource itself, and learn about the significance from their understanding. Okay, so I can't remember having kasi there's always a informant in the community who can give their first-hand experience about the cultural heritage itself.
Example sa mga institution, kasi we do also mapping sa institutions, right? So just like the Baguio City Public Library, there are no informants that I can ask about the beginnings. That's why it was really very difficult, because I cannot just rely kung ano yung nandun sa nilagay na nilang history. I need supportive, let's say, mga data regarding yung sa nakalagay doon sa history na nilagay doon sa net, sa internet, which is already uploaded. So I guess I cannot find any resources, no? And I was grateful that Mr. Stephen Jang was able to, post yung mga secondary resources wherein it will lead, no, to the earliest establishment of the library here in Baguio City. So it's only the secondary resources that we have.
What's good about the format is that it does not only contain the information, for example, from secondary sources, but you can include their first-hand experiences. You are allowed to interview users of the old library, for example. Then that can be included as part of the mapping. Like, for example, I remember, I think there are still a lot of resource persons here in the city who can remember the old library there where the present parking lot is. So, pwede po yan. We can get them as because there's a part here that that asks for stories related to the, for example, the library. And a lot of old timers would have a chance in the past to visit the library. And so we still interview them and include their stories as part of the mapping.
But that was not the first site of the library actually.
Oh, yeah, so much so. If you even have an earlier one,
Yes.
that would be the challenge. Who are the old timers who can still remember the first
19.
one?
That's the
Location.
problem is that why? Because there's a primary resource. Nobody touched regarding for the digging for the originally where came from the library, city library came from. Actually, I'm very surprisingly, I'm the only one actually this is the first one I digging and then look for the library where it started. But since the long time, many historians here and many local researchers here, but nobody yet searched for the library where it came from. This how can I find it? Because I digging for the primary source. But the primary source, they don't have it. Actually, they have it on the internet. If you look at it, just carefully look at it, you can find it. But the problem is the people not really attention to some primary source. I think so mostly one of the concern about many already on the online public domain and many resources only you can find it. But the problem is who will be the organizing this moving around in the resources, organizing, and one place put together to oculate it with the topics, some like organizing. So that's why I was first the question, early question was during the process of the researching time, there's so many come out because the team cannot put all things in the books. Book is the already limit portion of the essence of the things to put on the textbook. But during the process of time, many come out to the resource portal and all the oral, the interview, documentation. All the resources have to supposed to be go to the archive center.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
And then sharing with the team. At least copy version have to together. So permanently have to preserve the archiving center.
Yes.
But very sadly, still in Baguio City, they don't have archive center thing. Historical archive center, where you put that kind of thing, where you can find it. This is very, very important. For me, it's very important to have to start it. That's why I point to the already actually started. But who will be bring to all the primary resource? Now they have to give the donation. Have to really donate all the what they holding all the primary resources, photos, the documentations, all the things have to put one archive center with the archivist, specialist of the archivist. So actually it's a very important basic. If we don't have this one, all the times repeating and repeating. And then the overlapping, many overlapping, and spending energy and time and finances to go and here. Because for me, I'm very, very interesting for in 1905 to 1914. Actually, 1945 actually they disappear because American during the World War II times bombing they call the government complex, government center and complex. Actually, it's a very, very significant center of actually Baguio, and very wide and surprisingly wide. I have been actually researched about this one very long time, but finally I find one article. Some local independent researchers already wrote it. I tried to find it yesterday actually, and they already with a very nice photo. And then what started, what ended. And already, before I only find this one, I'm more not spending time and energy. Like that. Where I can find this one, this very difficult to find this primary, not primary source actually. This is 2019. That's the anniversary of the 100 century.
200,
Yes.
209.
Yes, that time was published by from the Heritage Promotion Publisher. They are the one chapter was wrote it regarding it. But this book already out of the print. I don't know this library have it or not have it. They don't have it. Very hard. But if there's an archive center, all the related one, anytime so I can go there. I look for it, and then I know that this one based on this data or the reference. Go on further research because I during the reading time, she also missing something. I was doing the research time. So can substitute some missing parts for more developing, more understanding, more dimension of the deep to go together digging. So I'm very, very emphasize we need really the archive center,
Yeah.
but we already have it in the library here, the public library.
Yeah, it's supposed to be,
Yes,
the library should be the archivist.
Okay.
But now, so please donation to the here, to all the what you have it, and then bring to the here to keep it.
Okay, so actually here we have the local history section. Okay, so supposed to be it contains the resources, information regarding Baguio City. But if you will visit, ma'am, kayo, because I know you have utilized that section very much during their process of cultural mapping. I guess you can see that it lacks, no? But then what we are doing now is not to, for me, is not to blame people before, but then we have to move forward and look into what we can do for now in order for us to fill in the gap. Okay, so I guess we have to move on, and actually we are starting with digitization, but then we lack also personnel. It's not enough. That's why I asked for, a job order, and it was approved, and we'll continue for 2023. We'll continue to digitize the collections that we have, the present collection. But then we're still looking into printed resources that are available that we can purchase. And also, I am asking for donations. If they can give resources that they have, or they can lend to us so that we can digitize. Anyway, it's for educational purposes only. We understand that. We understand the copyright law. That's why whatever we have here will be for educational purposes only. And I guess it's so fitting, it's just, talagang dito dapat ang archiving also.
Repository.
Yeah, the repository of the resources. So, I just don't know, I just don't know, and we're just hoping that we will be having ordinances that will mandate the people to donate yung mga resources regarding Baguio City or whatever they write, so that we will also have here. Because some resources are difficult to find, and it's not already available in publications. So I was also informed that there are a lot of resources in the Library of Congress, more than what we have here about Baguio City. And of course, I cannot go to the US to have this. But then, yun na nga, those are just, simple things that we can do. But then, if the families here in Baguio City have those resources, then maybe they can share with us so that we can share also to the community. So what's the use of keeping those to yourselves?
Anyway, we acknowledge the donors.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a challenge also for the city because right now the archivist is under the
General services.
General Services Office. Oo, baka that's a challenge for the city to consider and review the correct placement of tasks. But we were told that all our we were told that the materials that we're using for our cultural mapping should be submitted for archiving later on. So some of the perhaps the materials that we use, the photographs, there was an agreement that it should be part of the property of the city afterwards. And hopefully, they will still have to consider really enrich the archiving system in the city.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
You mentioned a while ago that you will give us a printed copy of that output ng cultural mapping. Can we have also the electronic format of that?
Oh, sure, of
Resources.
course. I think so.
Yes, because we are starting to accumulate electronic resources now. So because we have already the website, the library website.
I'm sure Architect Donna is going to prioritize the city public library to have both electronic and hard copies of the cultural mapping outputs.
Thank you.
I'm promising, but I'm sure you're going to be,
Yes,
and
because
they know the value of that
Architect
for
Donna told me.
information.
Additional, what this adding now asked before, I understand what he was talking about a while ago. If I think yung naintindihan ko sa question niya is there any chance na the city planning office can coordinate sa DepEd dito sa local so that it could have a grounds or kumbaga merong so magiging mandatory siya so that the students obliged to tour in the city, what are those cultural sites of the city. Kasi nga, I've been a teacher also, no? Na nagtuturo ako sometimes of my students na parang, wala lang, they will just comply for the subjects, yes. But actually, especially nowadays, this generation, they can learn from using their senses. When you see, when you touch, when you experience. So, is there's a chance that this city planning office can coordinate or collaborate with the DepEd and give some, for example, an ordinance or etc. that it could be the basis na maging mandatory siya to the schools here in city. So para kasi if you mentioned a while ago that the students or the school can request, what if hindi mag-request, di ba? Parang gano'n. So mas maganda kasi parang hindi na ako sa sinasabi niya. Mas maganda if there's a basis, no? Kasi magiging mandatory siya. So walang choice yung mga estudyante but to learn, no? To learn and dig this cultural importance thing, no? Kasi ako nga ngayon ko lang nalaman na yung palang what do we call this, the Carabao there in front of the Abanao. Ngayon ko nalaman na meron palang significance history, di ba? So, what if, kung meron bang chance na gano'n, para maging mamandate ito sa mga students? Kasi para napapass natin yung mga information and this, saka ma-utilize po yung inyong cultural mapping. Kasi what's the use of this, of putting these outputs and then ma-store lang siya sa isang place, pero this generation, they don't have a chance to experience it. Parang gano'n. Sayang yung mga efforts.
Yeah. This year, it was sponsored by the Councilor Alan Iyog. The School of Living Tradition will be institutionalized in schools. So, under the School of Living Tradition, I think that's where the school can use as an avenue or a venue to learn about culture in the community, not outside of the classroom. The School of Living Tradition. It would be nice to read about that ordinance and see its potentials to meet what you've mentioned, to improve the teaching methodologies in school. because a school of living tradition is an informal setting. It's an informal setting, and usually the teachers are cultural masters. They are the key informants, culture bearers in the community, who will provide the information to the students. And usually they are found, School of Living Traditions are not necessarily held in schools. It can be held where the informant is available, or it could be held on field. So that's one. But if it's not sufficient, if there's still a need, I don't think the city planning development office will be the proper office to initiate the. It would be nice to work with the city council. Councilor Cayabas is the one in charge of culture now. So if you can talk with him and find out how a policy or a resolution ordinance can be issued or could be passed here in the city regarding that, to really improve the teaching methodologies and experiences of the students here in the city. But it would be nice because yung SLT, because it's already available, baka we could start from there. It's already embedded in schools, meaning my understanding is that it is one methodology avenue for learning that schools can use. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, I was also a teacher myself.
Kasi kahit itong mismong BCPL, hindi sila informed na mayroong public library.
Yeah,
How much
that's
more
right.
those
But I admire your initiatives and efforts, the reading in the park, mga ganyan. That's really...
mga important institutions of the city.
Pero I think overall, the city library is making itself known and it's making itself present here in the city. With your website, it's really helping. It's really helping a lot. So, ganun po. Sige, let's try to work with the corresponding city councilor on that, and then give it as a challenge because it's a need, and therefore because that's their role. Yeah, to come up with the policies corresponding to the needs.
And can you see the evidence? We're talking about the students. This is very important. We are very few. How much for to those students, di ba? So, can you see kung very limited ang interesado? So, kung ito ay ma-integrate sa mga, we'll start from the basic education and then coordinate din sa mga higher education. Siguro, if they are well informed about this culture, siguro baka kulang itong space natin.
Yeah, that's right.
They will get more interested with it.
They have this iPad education naman that you mentioned. Yeah. The challenge is indigenization and localization of the curriculum. So, yeah, if only teachers would know, they need not break their heads, to prepare that module or what. If they're aware of the available resources already in the community, it would be easy. Pero it's also a challenge among teachers themselves. How passionate are they out there of teaching about
This is responsibility.
School of Living Tradition, cultural heritage.
Honestly speaking, I'd rather have as a really specific subject about culture, at least when it starts, at least grade 7, at least the start of high school. I'd rather have that subject, at least it would be taught repeatedly. I'd rather learn that repeatedly than having dancing in PE, the same dancing for
Dancing in
4
PE.
years. Because your culture, where you came from, that is your origin and that is your identity. And that is what the newer generation needs to know.
Yes.
That is a part of your identity, that is where your grassroots are, that is where you stemmed out from.
Yeah.
And that should be integrated in your head and your personality and your individuality.
Yes.
Because this is the first time that I really heard, we suddenly got a subject, UCSB. What is that, UCSB? Understanding culture. Okay, maybe culture, baka it was the culture of the whole Filipino. Then suddenly I was surprised. It was the culture of where you came from, Ibaloy, Kankanay. I was very surprised. Wow, we have a subject like this, and Because honestly, I myself, I was zero knowledge on culture back then. I mean, I can't really fully speak my language, my Ibaloy language. So
Yeah.
bit embarrassed.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. There's also this the issue about how culture was seen, perceived, right? It was put into contrast with religion, kasi that's why it became a clash between your beliefs, indigenous beliefs, and your faith, whether you're Christian or whether you're. So unfortunately, even until now, there are really among that, even among indigenous peoples themselves, where it is a choice of it's your religion or your indigenous practice, and unfortunately, it has been either or, not knowing that there are people now who are able to do both. They are able to see the value of both and the value of it, complementing each other. So, for example, I'm a Catholic. I would be a better Catholic because I am respectful of my own indigenous culture. Parang ganun ba? Na it's not actually an either or thing, but it's an enrichment, and it makes me a better, believer. And my spirituality has become deeper because of this, because of my knowledge of both. Ganon. But not everybody, I think, I'm sorry if I make a generalization, has that. But I'm not, there's nothing to blame here, but because it's actually the history that we have underwent. That's how we have undergone, our history has been like that. When the missionaries came, because for 300 years that the Spaniards, administered the Philippines, the Cordillera has always been independent. And that's why their indigenous practice had flourished at the time that in the lowlands, they have already built cathedrals, churches, and they have converted into Christianity. But here in the Cordillera, we had retained our indigenous practices. So that when the missionaries came in the 20th and the early 20th part of the century, at the beginning of the Americans' occupation, their background, where they came from, was also imported here. And I think at the time, there was still that very, very strong notion that anything indigenous was pagan. So that was very unfortunate. But that was at the beginning of the 20th century. But I can speak of the Catholic, for example. The 21st century, I think that the Catholics are now admitting their mistake. At the time that when they came here, they consider indigenous practice as being pagan, because actually the observance of Indigenous Month started because the CBCP, or the Catholic Church, recognized the second Sunday of the month as the indigenous people's
They celebrate it.
they
during
celebrate
the
the mass in respect of the indigenous peoples, knowing the value of what is it to be indigenous, and the value of their contribution to the environment, to the society. So at the time, I think they've come to realize that it's the indigenous doesn't make them pagan just because they were practicing those indigenous practices. I think there's an understanding that had been elaborated, that had been expanded to be open to learning from the indigenous people in terms of their spirituality. So wala na yung dati na the usual 20th century missionary work of looking at the indigenous people as pagan. So I think there was this bishop, I think Tutu in Africa. Tutu, the famous bishop who said that before entering a community, you remove your sandals if you're a missionary, because you are not, before you arrive, God is already there. So it is that principle, I think, that there is now a reconsideration of the indigenous practices as something that needs to be, forgotten and thrown. But I think it's still a struggle for some, because some are stuck in that belief, whereas there are still, for those who are still continuing the indigenous practice as part of their cultural identity, part of their who they are, a part of their belief, but not necessarily, closing the doors to the Christian faith and to other faiths. And so the possibility of interfacing their Christian faith and their indigenous practice. So that's also a challenge. So I think
Questions? You have more questions?
Actually, very interesting for the dog issue. How dog became one of the part of the cultural map to categorize, because since American colonizing time, many tourist report, and even in America, the mainland, it's a lot of the emphasize if you go to the Baguio market, there's the dog market. You can see the many people moving around there as like kind of for eating.
Yeah, the barbarism. They want to
Yes,
emphasize
so-
the barbarism.
Yes, very wild. So I reading one of the also the governor here, the American governor time. Their education field is, they said, we are bringing to our field. It's not only in the classroom. We are going to the market. We also teaching to them too how can not eat the dogs. And that kind of the activity, how can we stop it? And even they making the laws, ordinance of the cannot making this marketing of the dog marketing. And very interesting one.
Yeah, very interesting. Also, because at the time, the American occupation here in the Philippines was controversial in the states themselves. It wasn't automatic that we became a colonial of the Americans, because there were also oppositions in the states at the time to annex the Philippines. But the other parties in the states wanted to justify the annexation of the Philippines. And one of the reasons for annexation is that the Filipinos are unable to govern themselves. And among the evidences that they showed, how to show how backward and how incapable the Philippines was, is to show, one of their means is to show the indigenous people. That's why in the 1904 Louisiana exhibition,
Yes.
they showed the indigenous people whom they took here in the Cordillera killing dogs, because that's their way of showing how barbaric these people are and that they need the Americans
To civilize them.
to civilize them. Yeah, that's the white man's white man's burden, the manifest destiny of the Americans. But yeah, that's the background also.
1916, the review, the Philippine review, the journal, like a magazine or a journal. And just I saw you wearing the traditional clothes like that, exactly same like that. The girls, the five of the girls standing with the indigenous clothes, wearing same like exactly like that wearing. And then on the picture, it's with the white, little bit different. different wearing the clothes to white with some the little bit modified one. And then the title I saw be so uncivilized, wild, like primitive, wearing the clothes. And then down is the some civilized clothes like that. I was surprised.
Yeah, that's part of the, I think you say propaganda to justify the annexation of the Philippines by the Americans at the time, because the nationalists at the time, after the Spanish-Filipino War, said we are capable because the Philippine independence was already declared in June 12, 1898. But because of the Battle of Manila, that was the reason for the Americans to enter. That's where the Philippine-American War started. But during that war, I think it's the Democratic Party that was opposing the Republican Party to annex the Philippines. Mark Twain was one of those who defended not to annex the Philippines, but the Republicans used the pictures of indigenous people to show how the Philippines is still backward and that they needed but that's history already. So now we have Baguio City that was created by the Americans. And anyway, the benefit of it, you will see, we have a beautiful city because of this.
Yeah.
So that's part of the historical background. So yeah.
No more questions because I guess we have to end from here, and of course we are so much grateful for having you here, ma'am, and we learn a lot and at least understand how cultural mapping, the flow of cultural mapping and how we do it and how you do it. At least we came to understand that it was not easy actually, especially tapping people who will be the primary sources. Okay, so with that we would like to just simple token naman po, ma'am. Okay. So this certificate of appreciation is awarded to Ma'am Rosella Bani Camte as a token of gratitude for being an esteemed guest by sharing her valuable knowledge and expertise during the Reading Club Forum held at the Baguio City Public Library, given this 29th day of October 2022. Okay, so invite ko ay
Okay, one more. Okay, 1, 2. Okay.
Thank you so much for this opportunity also.
Yeah, thank you also,
I hope you
ma'am.
learned from
And,
here.
We really learned a lot. No? We just hope that whatever yung mga output po ninyo sa cultural mapping will be found here at the Baguio City Public
Before the end of the year, we hope.
Yeah, so hopefully, and we hope that we would also come out not only with the printed but also with the
e-copy.
Yeah, the e-copy of the resources. And of course, what we have talked about a while back in regarding sa suggestions sa mga maybe we can also suggest during the meetings dun sa DepEd, yung napag-usapan po dito, and then yung mga suggestions so that they could also consider, because we have to understand also na yung DepEd, may sarili din naman sila. Yes, may curriculum din naman sila. So, we cannot just, dictate, but maybe we can suggest, and even dito rin sa mga ordinances, we could also suggest. Okay? So, with that, we would like to say thank you for listening to us, listening to Ma'am, and of course sa ating mga members ng Reading Club. There may be few of us here because we understand that it's, there's a typhoon, So, we do hope na by the next time that we will be having, will be growing in numbers. But anyhow, we are also online since hybrid naman po. So it's not only face-to-face, but we also have to go online. Okay?
Yes.
So with that, we would like to invite you next Saturday for another discussion of the Reading Club, and we will be having different guests naman po. But then, it will be posted sa aming Facebook page who will be the next guest speaker. And so, in behalf of Baguio City Public Library, in behalf of the Reading Club, we would like to say thank you and have a great weekend.